So I know people are going to roll in here over the next 5 to 10 minutes, but our first guest needs to leave a little early, so we're going to switch it up, and we'll start with Karen Washington, who will not allow me to give the proper introduction that she so deserves. She's a farmer and an activist, and has been real quick, a mentor and a partner of mine since 2001, and I am beyond appreciative that you're here tonight. This has been an incredible, this is our last week, and this is an incredible group of engaged individuals yearning for information and who are out there doing incredible work. So, Karen, thank you very much.
So, can you hear me? All right, because I got that Bronx voice. So, as Mike said, I'm a farmer and activist. Been knowing Mike for so long. So he asked me to come to speak to you about some of the things that you've been discussing in the food system, and so my perspective. And so I want to start off by saying and asking the question, so is the food system broken? Some say no, some say yes. And so that was a question that was always asked time and time again, especially for low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. And so at one time, I used to drink the Kool-Aid. It was good. Because I believed that it was broken, it needs to be fixed, and we need to put more changes in policy. And then I realized, living in a low-income neighborhood, because I'm from the Bronx, and looking at these United States of America, a great country, a rich country, why is it that we have hunger and poverty? And then I got to thinking, so let me sort of look at the food that's in my neighborhood. Because from time and time again, we're talking about food sustainability and, people need to eat their fruits and vegetables. And so the question that I asked, so is the food system broken? Then I realized, looking at my food system, looking at the food in my neighborhood, and going into other neighborhoods are privileged and looking at their food system, and being in the United States, the greatest and richest country in the world, the answer was, you know what? It's not broken. It's doing exactly what it's set up to do. A capitalistic system that is bent on, the food system is bent on race, economics, and demographics. And I say that because I'm saying, why is it that in a country like this, most poor people, both urban and rural, are suffering? Why is it that from time to time again, when people talk about the food system and sustainability, they will tell us that from time to time again, all you got to do is eat fruits and vegetables. And then you'll get better. And you'll be part of the food system. As if eating fruits and vegetables is going to solve some of the social problems, some of the social injustices that we have in our neighborhood. And then I had a chance to look at the pyramid system. You know the pyramid system, right? The food pyramid system. And I started dismantling that because for me the food pyramid system is processed food, junk food, and fast food. That's what I see in my neighborhood. Processed food, junk food, and fast food. And yet time and time again, we're told, eat our fruits and vegetables and we're going to be fine. And so I have been working so hard, along with so many people, to try to bring to the forefront, when we talk about the food injustices, to talk about it through the lens of people who are marginalized. Is that from time and time again, the food system is being looked through the lens of people with privilege. And then they start using words as organic and all natural. And I'm saying, so now it's bad enough that we don't have good fruits and vegetables, but now you're putting a tag on it. So now you're making us feel much worse because now the terms organic is being used, and you look in our neighborhood, where's organic? And again, you're putting the food system at a higher echelon level than the people that need it the most. I live in the Bronx. We'll get down below. Out of 62 counties in New York State, the Bronx ranks 62 as what? 62 as the most unhealthiest county in New York State. And so I asked the question, how is it that we're supposed to be in this food system that talks about sustainability? It doesn't, because it doesn't bring into the conversation about equity. Not equality, equity. And the fact of the matter is that in a food system, everybody has a right to food that is fresh, that is local, that's affordable. This is not happening. And now, folks, we got y'all talking about food justice and food sovereignty. How many of you have heard that word? Food justice. Yeah, right. So when I say the word food justice, you're going to give me that cookie cutter definition of what it is. So what's food justice? Come on, popcorn style. Food justice is what? Don't let me call on y'all. Don't be afraid. Huh? Equal opportunity. What else? Equity. Right. All those. So you know what? Forget about it. Forget about that word food justice. Because you know what? It's been co-opted. Everybody knows the cookie cutter definition of food justice. It has been co-opted. Because in order to use that word food justice, it's a transformational word, phrase that evokes action. And if you're not doing anything that is active, you're not doing food justice. If you're not looking at the injustices, the social injustices, and working on that, you're not doing food justice. So I tell people time and time again, don't tell me about you know what food justice is. What are the injustices that you are working on? So there is justice. So what are some of the injustices?
Fair wages.
Huh?
Fair wages.
Fair wages. What else?
Accessibility.
I want to hear because I'm going to test you. I'm testing your class. What are some of the injustices? I know you did this, right? What? Talk to me.
Accessibility.
What else?
Support local farmers.
What else?
Affordable housing.
What else?
Mass incarceration.
What else? Inequity when it comes to race and gender. Land grabbing, a big one.
Zoning laws.
Zoning law. Ha! Bring that up. Zoning laws.
Antitrust.
Antitrust. And these are some of the social injustices that are out there. So we're going to talk about food justice. And if you're going to use that term food justice, you better be sure that you are working on the injustices. Because to use that word means nothing unless you are working on it, the injustices. Again, it's transformational, it's active. Same with food sovereignty. I got y'all good. Food sovereignty. How many of you heard food sovereignty? You get that in your class too? All right. So, talk to me. What is food sovereignty?
Self-determination.
What else?
Ownership.
What else?
Ownership food distribution.
Throwing it out too. Throwing it out too. Again, first of all, wait a second. To make yourself look good, we're going to talk about food justice. So everybody's talking about food justice, but wait a second. All of a sudden, someone pops up food sovereignty. Wow, to make ourselves good now. So now we know food justice, so we're going to add a little sprinkle of food sovereignty because, you know, we want to make sure that now we're in the know because we talk about food justice and we talk about food sovereignty. And again, we get into those cookie-cutting definitions on what food sovereignty is about. And I say co-opted because food sovereignty was a mechanism that was established by indigenous people in the global south. Those are the people who worked on food sovereignty because they worked hard for governance, the right to land, the right to be able to have their own seeds, to grow their own vegetables. And we just took it because it sounds so good and made it ours. And so when we start using these words, we have to make sure that we know the context behind why we use those words and give credit to those who have been using those words fighting for justice. So if we're going to use food sovereignty, we better make sure that, again, we're giving it credit to those indigenous people in the global south who have been working so hard for governance and for land ownership and the right to own their own food and grow their own food. Then we can speak in that terms of that context about what food sovereignty is all about. Next thing I'm going to throw at you. Food deserts. Hey, because I know some of you have been reading what I put on there. So how many of you have heard the term food deserts? So, what's food deserts?
Lack of nutritional food.
What else?
Limited access.
One more. What else?
Deficit analysis.
Roll that out the window too. Because the term that we use, and I coined the term food apartheid. Ooh, what? Because you know what? I got my homie here, Ray. You know, we go way back. I got friends in Detroit. I got friends in Philly. I got friends in Oakland and the hood. And I'm saying, okay. Like, you know, do we call our community food deserts in the hood? Wait a second. If we're going to talk about our community, we're going to talk about through the lens of hunger and poverty. Because when you say food deserts, you're not getting at the core of what that means. And people in the desert is going to tell you, you know what? We got food, we grow food in the deserts. And an S to it becomes dessert. And again, you do not have the conversation of what it means to have the inability to have food on your table, the inability to be able to afford food, to sit down and grow food, unless you're talking about the components that are preventing people in low-income neighborhoods to have access and availability to food. And a lot of it is based on three things. Again, it's based on race, economics, and again, geographic. And so when we say food apartheid, all of a sudden, right, you said, woo, wait a second, we got to get deep here. We need to get deep in the conversation, the why in low-income neighborhoods, via urban or rural, but especially in communities of color. Why do we have the food that we have? It's no rocket science. It's no rocket science. So when people come up to me and say, we're privileged, so what is it that we can do? Or the student wants to write a paper because they want to come into my neighborhood. So can you tell me exactly what is it like, being in a low-income neighborhood and getting food? And I'm saying, you know what, that stops. Don't ask me, because now the challenge that I'm asking students is go into your neighborhood of affluence, and that's your mom and your dad and the people that live in your neighborhood of affluence. What do they think about food justice? What do they think about hunger and poverty? What are they doing to stem the tide of hunger and poverty instead of putting the burden on us to explain? People with privilege need to have that conversation amongst themselves, because I can't help you. And I'm not here to help you. But what I'm here is for you to recognize your power and your privilege. And how does that show up? How does that show up? Knowing that we have neighborhoods that are in distress. Knowing that for me, in the Bronx, I wake up every day because we're fighting that G word. You know what that G word is? Say it louder.
Gentrification.
We're fighting that G word. Because I tell people we don't need no fixing. We don't need no fixing. For years, again, another drink of the Kool-Aid that I had is that, hearing people telling me, well, you know what, how is it living in a low-income neighborhood, a poor neighborhood? And I was drinking that Kool-Aid. So I had to change my lens on how I look at my people. My people aren't poor. There's some powerful people. There's some rich people. There are people, they know how to do so much with the little resources that they have. And so if you're going to look at our community, look at the vitality that we have. Look at the strength that we have. And then ask us not how you can help us, not what we need. Ask us what we want. And every day I look at my community because I'm saying to myself, why is it that I have to look out my window, go down the street, and see lines and lines of people standing for food? For food! Soup kitchens and food pantries. Granted, they do an excellent job. They do an excellent job. But a food pantry and a soup kitchen is supposed to be for emergency purposes. It is not supposed to be a vehicle to feed people and make yourself feel good. We should be appalled by that. Because in terms what we should be thinking about is how do we put food kitchens and soup kitchens out of business? How do we work on that? How in every soup kitchen or food pantry should be a questionnaire. Why are you here? Well, I'm here because I don't have job. I have job. Services. Here. Here's services so you can get a job. I am here because I am homeless. Here. Here's services for you to get a home. I am here because of domestic violence. Here are services. But they don't ask those questions. Why? Because at the end of the day, someone is getting paid. We should be upset and appalled that in the greatest country of the world, we have food pantries and soup kitchens that are being used as a way of feeding people. Not in terms of needs. And we need to start looking at the food system. This is the 21st century. We have to start looking at the food system the way it's running. And start asking those questions. And so, for me, like I said, I wake up every day because I know the G is coming, but without a fight. Because you know what? What they did in Harlem, broken home. What they did in the Lower East Side, what they did in Brooklyn, ain't happening in the Bronx without a daggone fight.
That's right.
Because we fight. We're going to make sure that we're not pushed out so that we can't live in our own neighborhoods. So what, again, my homie Ray, what we think about and talk about is economic viability. If you want the answer, when people say, well, how can you help? How do we help low-income neighborhoods? Three things. Give us opportunity. We don't want a handout. We want a hand in. Give us resources. And give us either land or capital. And you give us those three things, and you see how a community will change. But you know that ain't going to happen, folks. You know that ain't going to happen. And why it's not going to happen?
Because of race.
Power.
Come on, baby. Talk to me. Say it louder.
Power.
Power. Power is a drug, y'all. And people with power don't want to give it up.
Thank you, Dan.
Let's face it.
Thank you.
The whites with power, the affluent with power, don't want to give it up. Because all of a sudden you're going to see black and brown people in suits and ties. Black and brown people living next door to you. You try to leave that. You want to have black and brown people who are intelligent? What? Nobody comes into our neighborhood talking about financial viability. No one comes in our neighborhood and said, you know what? Let's put some investment here. Let's do some training. Let's take these young people and see what they're all about. Let's put them underneath our wing and let's have them open up a store, a business. Why isn't that happening? But yet, a past canceled. So let me tell you where the nearest welfare, store is. The food pantry and the soup kitchen. That's what we hear. But you know what? I'm tired of it. I'm tired. Unless you're going to come into my neighborhood with some financial literacy and some job creation, then that's how you're going to fix the problem. Every inch, every step, every block that I walk on Tremont Avenue is a fast food restaurant. I had a meeting with my council person because everybody should know their elected official. Everybody, I know everybody. Everybody should know their elected official. You demand that. You put them in office. So I call my council person. I need to speak with you. You bring in a group of people? Heck no. I'm bringing myself. Because I need for you to hear one-on-one what is happening in my neighborhood. And for you to go back to City Hall and tell them that we need to have some zoning laws. We need to change. You can't tell people to eat healthy when every corner there's a McDonald's, a Wendy's, a Subway, a Kentucky Fried Chicken. Do away with it. Let them be one every 10 blocks. When I go into affluent neighborhoods, you got to drive to a McDonald's. You got to walk far to McDonald's. Why is it that we, on every block, there is a fast food restaurant? And let me tell you something. As a person of color, as a black woman standing here, looking at my ancestors and seeing how, when we were brought here, our narrative change, I'll talk about that a little later, but we were brought here, we were given the scraps that nobody wants. Look at our food in the Bronx, in low-income neighborhoods. It's the food that nobody wants. So in essence, what are you telling us? What are you telling us? Slow death, slow genocide. That's what I see. Because no one is changing the system. It is what it is. It is what it is. People continue to get sick. Type 2 diabetes, obesity, hypertension, cancer. It continues to happen. So don't tell me that we don't know the solution. Because we do. Because if people care enough, they wouldn't have all these fast food restaurants. If people care enough, they wouldn't see the G word that pushes people out. If people care enough, there will be an influx of stimulus, a financial stimulus in these neighborhoods so that there's job creation. And I'm not talking about them daggone McDonald's jobs. I'm talking about giving jobs, especially to our young people that are so smart. That are so smart. But yet, they got to do stuff illegal to have a legal business so that they can make ends meet. And then they wind up incarcerated.
Thank you, Carol.
And so why don't we have this conversation? So your job is to be responsible and to be proactive. And when you see injustice, you got to call it out. What kills us is complacency. Sitting back and seeing things happen. And yet we're going to write a grant because we can go into these neighborhoods and we can teach people how to grow food in our community gardens. Heck no. We know how to grow food. Those with privilege must share those privileges. And I tell people right off the bat, there are 3 things when it comes to power. Either you're going to give it up, you're going to share it, or I'm going to take it. Because I have seen the food system. I see it crystal clear. You see it crystal clear. The haves, the have-nots, the affluents, the poor, the people just trying to make it. And yet, we're told time and time again, eat your vegetables and your fruits and you'll be better. Until there is economic stimulus in low-income neighborhoods so that they feel inclusive in the food system, because you can't talk about food without the intersection. Housing, education, education, the environment, all of these issues. Because if you just talk about food alone, it means nothing. It means nothing. And if you dump food, that means nothing, because no one wants charity. People want to feel the power that they can own something, and they can stand on their own 2 feet, and they can buy, and they can feed their family, they can send their children to good schools, and they can have a house that they own. Instead of being relegated to always think of, what is it that you need? How can I fix things? Instead of asking people, what do you want? Ooh, child. Okay, 5:55. So, I got to end it like this, because let me just say one more thing, because he said 5:55. For me, as I stand up here to you today, water. I got to say this, because I know I'm going to get emotional. You know, for me, I've been blinded. My whole history has been stolen from me. So I try to talk to young people, young black and brown people. What is their contribution in agriculture? The fact is that we were brought here enslaved, not because we were strong. We were brought here because of our knowledge in agriculture. The settlers came here, didn't know what to grow, never seen land like that. We were the ones that were able to bring seeds in our hair to grow the food for this United States. We were the ones that knew how to do crop rotation and irrigation. We were the ones that were able to invent the hoe and the sickle. We didn't get that in our textbook. We were made to feel inferior because we were robbed of our history when it came to agriculture. But it's a new day. It's a new day because once you know the truth sets you free. And as a black person, I stand here proud knowing that in these United States, it was us that were at the forefront of agriculture. And now I tell young men and women that. So now if they want to be farmers, they don't look at it as slave work. If they want to be farmers, it's because there's a legacy that's through their veins, that's been robbed, but no longer. And now they understand that they have a place in these United States, and they have a place when it comes to agriculture. Thank you so much. I got time for 2 questions. I know that was a lot. I know you'll need to debrief. And I don't, in place, let me just tell you something. I come up from a place of love. I come from a place of love, you know what I'm saying? The hurt that so many people have been feeling, the negativity that's in the air, we don't need that. How do we come together? How do we come together to share resources, share our privilege? How do we come together? So that's what I just want to say that, because a lot of you are looking at me like, All right, any questions? 2 questions? If not, we can continue the conversation. Yes?
In a system that's not set up for most of us to thrive, I've heard talk of new economies and opting out and alternative economies. What do you have to say about that?
Well, you know what? People talk about this capitalist system because you know what? Food wasn't commodified. You know, food has been commodified. You know, if you think about food in general, before the settlers, indigenous people, they never owned anything. They didn't own food. They didn't own land. They didn't own people. They didn't own animals. As soon as we start owning things, that's when the system started to change. So how do we change the system? Because I remember back in the day, we used to share stuff. We don't share stuff. You know what I'm saying? Back in the day, it wasn't about money. It was about sharing our resources and the goods that we have. And so now people are starting to think about bartering. And they're starting to pool their money. You know, we did a little thing called susus. That's a little quiet thing. But yeah, people used to put their monies together to make sure that if people wanted to buy a house, people put their money together so that person buy a house and the next person. So they're changing, starting to look like that because a lot of people can't get credit and can't go to the bank. One more question, I gotta go. Yes?
I mean, I think I hear you, but a lot of the issues that you're talking about has to really, like, the demand has to come from our communities. It cannot, we can't send you to the city council to ask for us,
Right.
you know, what it is that we
Right, she's saying that it has to cover the community, that's right, that's what I'm telling you.
But I think it has to also start with educating the community itself. So our role is to educate them, to sort of like bring the knowledge into the community so people know what it is that they're, you know, what it is that they know their history, they know their power, and they know what it is that they should ask for.
Right, you're absolutely right, but you know what people need to do is listen. People don't listen to what's happening in the communities. They come with the idea, well, this is what they figured that we want, instead of listening to what the people are asking for in communities. So again, thank you so much for having me. I wish I could stay longer.
You want the cap?
Yeah. Thank you, sweetie. Sorry I got to go. What's the question?
Can I ask one?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm asking one question. So you are also a farmer,
Yeah.
and you, as a farmer, in your first year of farming, I think made $1 an hour,
$1 an hour.
and then $2 an hour during
$2
the
an hour, yes.
And you have a market that you've been running for years in the Bronx, right?
Mhm.
And there are questions around affordability,
Mm-hmm,
and you're charging a price that is fair for you,
mm-hmm.
that may be inaccessible for some.
Okay, so how to get around, because we have the Union Square Market, which is a high end, and we have the Bronx Market, which is low end. You know how we get away with it? Because we talk to people about the cost and value of food. I'm a farmer, and I tell my people in the Bronx, when they say, how come I gotta pay $2 for a bunch of carrots, or how come I gotta pay $4 for a dozen eggs, or $4 for a pound of tomato that we grow? I'm the farmer. There's something to that. We don't talk about the cost and value of food. And when I talk to my customers about the cost and value of food and how it impacts me and how it impacts our community, people get it. We don't talk to people who are labeled marginalized about the cost and value of food. Because when I see people come to my market with their Jordan sneakers and their Samsung or iPhones, I have to talk to them, you know, like, where is your emphasis on what is important? And start having those conversations. 99% of the customers will say, you know what, they understand. And some will say, we can't afford it. But they understand why that food is not free. There's a cost behind it. And the cost is that coming down, either from the community gardens in the Bronx or from upstate, that there's a cost in that. There's a cost for my time. There's a cost for us putting that seed, buying the seed. There's a cost for soil. There's a cost to that. And talking to people about the cost and the value, that tomatoes and those carrots, there's a value behind that. And that value is me. And that means something. And when you start talking to people deemed poor, marginalized, because there's a whole new vocabulary before, what? There's a cost and a value of food? Because they've been giving free food all the time. I'm up against the food pantries and the soup kitchens that give free food. So I have to say, stop the madness. I'm a for-profit farmer, not a non-profit farmer. I'm a for-profit farmer, and that means something. So I can feed my family, and I can make money that stays in the community and give back to the community. So that every week we bring food that you are entitled to eat. You're entitled to eat food that is fresh and local. That's your dignity. You're entitled to have it. And once you start explaining to that, people get it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, Karen, thank you. safe travels to the Bronx and enjoy. Obviously, Barbara, I know you're more than qualified. That's an incredible, tough act to follow. Won't be the first time. But we are also blessed to have Barbara Turk with us tonight. Barbara is the Director of Food Policy for New York City in the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services. Prior to her appointment in April 2014, she was a senior fellow at Community Resource Exchange, a nonprofit consulting firm specializing in serving organizations working to fight poverty, promote equity, and expand opportunity. Prior to joining CRE, Barbara was hired to lead the strategic and financial turnaround of the YWCA of Brooklyn as its executive director. She was director of HIV care services for the Medical and Health Research Association, now Public Health Solutions, in the mid-1990s, administering federal grants to New York City for services for people living with HIV and AIDS. Barbara is also a founding member of the city's first organization focused on the impact of HIV on women, and organized the first state-funded consortium of AIDS service providers in Upper Manhattan. Barbara started her career in government in 1985, first as policy advisor to City Council President Carol Bellamy, and then Manhattan Borough President David Dinkins. She was Deputy Director for Health and She was Deputy Director for Health and Human Services in the New York City Office of Management and Budget under Mayor Dinkins. The mission of the Mayor's Office of Food Policy is to advance the city's efforts to increase food security, promote access to and awareness of healthy foods, and support economic justice and opportunity in the food system. So join me in welcoming Barbara Turk. Thank you. Yes, though you and Barbara is also our final guest.
Am I the final guest?
Of the, yeah.
That's so exciting. All right, are these microphones working?
They are.
Because I might want to just, not stand behind that.
Okay. Is it,
Hello? Hello? It says it's on, but, you
Try it.
Hello? Is that light also going to be on for the rest of this time? Okay, that's better. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. And I want to acknowledge that Anna Bessendorf is also here, who works in the Office of Food Policy and joined us about 4 or 5 months ago, right? Yeah. So I have some idea about what you've been talking about, which is kind of which has to do with the underlying structures that reinforce injustice in the food system. Is that basically a good summary? Yeah. All right. And I'm the government person, right? So, government people are not known as being on the side, the sector that's really going to change a lot about capitalism. So I just want to start right there. And I think some of the things that Karen was talking about are absolutely true. Not that you needed me to affirm what she was saying. I just want to tell you that I agree with her, especially as it relates to the conversation about government deciding what people who are living in the city's redlined communities, because I know you have this, historically redlined communities, because I know you have that context as well, that she's right about all that. So I'm not here to contest any of that either. Let's just start right there. And then I'm also here because, if you're going to have, my job is to be professionally optimistic about, or requires me to be professionally optimistic about what's possible here. And I think one of the first things I want to say is I sometimes wonder, this is just something I'm going to, just to all my closest friends here who I've never met, I sometimes wonder, some of you, not all of you, but a lot of you I haven't met, I do sometimes wonder at what I refer to in my job as food separatism, which, and you know what I'm talking about, right? You're my friend here, is that, and I get it, like that in every movement, there's a period of time when a movement has to be, sort of separate itself out, define itself, define its goals, define what its mission is. And that works against us in a lot of conversations because when I walk into a room, I symbolize a lot of different things to people. I used to work as a chaplain, so when I was a chaplain, it was like everything you ever hated or loved about religion, I represented that when I walked in a room. So if I walk in a room and I'm the city's food policy advisor, some people refer to me as the food czar, as if there could ever even be such a thing. If there's a food czar in this country, it's probably one of the 5 companies that produces the most food, so let's just get that out of the way. But there is this idea that somehow I'm either the food police, so I'm the person who's going to yank the cookie out of your hand, or I am the person who can change it all just from where I sit because the mayor's office is a powerful place, okay? Or I am the person who works with the foodies, and I'm really just, mostly what I do, the idea goes is that, gee, you're at the latke tasting event to support Sylvia's Center, that must mean, you must do this every night, right? You must go to these tasting events every night. As a practical matter, so let me just continue on this in this vein of food separatism. So everything Karen was saying, because I really want to build off of this, everything Karen was saying is true that we do have a deep economic problem, and we have a deep problem in the city around, and I would say that a lot of that is focused right now on land. Okay, so and I'm not just saying this because you're here. I would say that just about everything that I work on to try to make it better, right? To make changes happen, whether we're thinking about, gee, wouldn't it be great to have, here's an organization that wants to do a nonprofit grocery store, just as an example. That ultimately ends up in a place where would we even do that, right? Where would that real estate come from? Or it comes to the land related to farms and to community gardens, and the fact that there is no sovereignty right now in that arena, and unless you're able to buy land yourself, which is very limited and it's very expensive here. So I think there's a lot of challenges here, and but I think it's time to say that a lot of the underlying things, I'm not saying I don't think to walk away from this class and say I have to fight capitalism is particularly, it doesn't give me a path. What does give me a path is to say, that we need to be building bridges and building community and building movement with people who are working on issues related to zoning, for example, and affordable housing. It means that we need to be, and I'm trying to practice what I preach, by the way, within the city government, right? So it's we need to be in league with people who are distributing community development funds and making choices about where those community development funds go. And we need to be working with people who are working on increasing the number of job development programs and increasing. We have a contract target for MWBE, minority and women-owned businesses, and that we are aiming as a city to have 30% of our contracts be with minority and women-owned businesses. So I'm always so where can I get a piece of that, and can I help make sure that some of those funds get directed in terms of investing in new businesses or supporting new businesses, or being directed to businesses in the food chain, the food supply chain. So there's all this kind of piggybacking that we have to do in terms of just issues. So if you're not already connecting, for those of you who are doing work, I do recommend that you think about how you are already, or how you could be connecting with other people who are working on community development issues. I'll just call it that, right, for the time being. Community development issues across the city, whether that's with government folks or nonprofit folks, or with some of the more active businesses in town. That's, I think, increasingly I think that's what my job is. So I just wanted to say that we've kind of tried to define this job. The original job was really defined as pretty much that food police job. Maybe that's not very generous to the prior administration, but I know that people started hiding their food when I showed up to the first couple of meetings that I went to. That is part of my job. I work on overseeing the city's procurement, food procurement, and making sure that it is compliant with the nutrition standards. It's not a bad thing. We have probably some of the most nutritionally vulnerable people in the city are eating in our schools. At least 2, sometimes 3 meals a day with us, or they are incarcerated. Also depending completely on the food that there is available to them in wherever they are incarcerated, and in homeless shelters, in daycare centers, in foster care settings, in senior centers. All that food is part of our $300 million food spend, and so it's very important to us that we have those kinds of regulations. Otherwise, I would argue that, you know, always we're required to do everything at the lowest possible dollar, and I would worry about the quality of food we would get if we were, and have gotten in the past, like going back decades, if we were not thinking about raising the bar. So I just wanted to say a couple of those things because Karen was here, and you know, there's no point in coming up. Karen's just, she should get an honorary doctorate from Cornell. Maybe we could all work, she's not here right now, we could plan that right now, right? We can start a letter writing campaign. Yeah, right? Because why isn't she a doctor? Well, anyway, so what I thought I would actually do tonight is, because it's a little bit late and my voice is a little bit low and it can kind of put you to sleep. So what I really want to do actually is, I'm very interested, since we're at the end of your fantastic class. I have no idea who most of you are or why you're here. And I'm interested in all of you. I wish we could have that conversation, but I would love it if you would ask me some questions and start some dialogue. I think that's really what I would like to do.
Great.
And I knew I could count on somebody just going, yes. I've been waiting for her to invite me to ask a question. What does your shirt say?
It says, this is a dress, not a oversized t-shirt.
It's fantastic, thank you. Would you mind telling me just your first name and why you came to the class?
Yeah.
If you would want to do that?
Yeah, I
It's an
can.
invitation, you don't have to do it.
So my name's Ivanka, and I'm interested in food in cities and how we're going to feed each other, let alone ourselves, in the future, because I'd like to design cities in the future.
Wow.
So currently I work at a food pantry,
Mm-hmm.
and I am curious, here's my question, I won't bore you with my life details. How much money food pantries get on average, high, low, like how do you rate them if they're top producing? Is it certain neighborhoods? The reason why I'm asking is I'm trying to understand how money is allocated and where it goes, because there's this assumption. The place where I'm at is in the Upper West Side. However, 62% of our clientele, I'm sorry. Oh, look.
Oh yeah, maybe I'm not yelling you loud enough. So I work in a food pantry on the Upper West Side. 62% of our clientele is Latin, and the percentages mix from therein. And there's this perception that the Upper West Side does nothing to help other people, only themselves. And I'm trying to figure out this conundrum because I'm like on the floor doing the helping. And I'm just trying to figure out how much money is going out the door and if it's supposed to stay in the community, if it's the community helping other communities, if, you know, there are sister sites. I'm trying to figure out the logic of all those 500 pantries. Thanks.
Sure. So there's a whole set of questions about how are we going to feed ourselves as cities, and I can talk about that. I can give you an international perspective, because who knew that this job was going to be so international as well. But I'm going to just put a pin in that for a second, put it over here, and talk about food pantries. You work at Wesca. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, you characterize it very well. And it's one of the biggest pantries in New York City, the West Side Campaign Against Hunger. It's been around for a long time. And a lot of people come because it's very convenient to the West Side lines. A lot of people come, especially from the Bronx, to that pantry because it's big, there's a lot going on there, there's a lot of fresh food there. It's really one of the most extraordinary, best places to get food in the city, and if you're in need. And so some of the food at that pantry is actually, they raise money and they purchase food. And the rest of the food comes from probably at least one of the following programs, probably all three. There is a federal program that is what we call commodity food. So you know how they buy food from farmers and that's surplus? That food, it's no longer big blocks of cheese in the same way that it used to be. You remember this time, right? But it's other stuff. So it could be milk, it could be peanut butter, it could be a lot of different things that they buy, that TFAP buys off the market and then distributes to food pantries. And that source has actually increased recently because of the tariff discussion. We could have a lot of conversation about this. But basically a lot of farmers are really doing badly because of this war that's happening around trade, inspired by some impulse in Washington. So, and it's actually hurting, it's hurting people, but then they, for $80 billion, paid farmers, and now suddenly we have all this fluid milk in New York City. In pantry land, it's called fluid versus, powdered. So the fluid milk in New York City. It's interesting. So that's one program. That's called TFAP. Don't ask me to remember right now what the acronym is. The state has a program that it created in the 80s. It's called HIPNAP. It's the Healthy Something 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 Nutrition Access Program. And that program is state purchased food that your pantry can apply for, and you can have a contract or you can get it through United Way. There's all different channels for this. And you can get through HIPNAP. That's generally basically an account where you can buy stuff from the company called Driscoll. And there's other details, but that's one source. And then you'll see what my point is in a minute. You're probably getting it. And then the city has a program called the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or EFAP. TFAP, EFAP, and HIPNAP. Like, makes you just want to go to sleep, doesn't it? The naps. And it's really, but seriously, all of these programs were created, and in part, especially the city and state programs, is the point I want to make, because SNAP is however you feel about SNAP. I wish Karen was still here to talk about SNAP with me, but SNAP was cut during the Reagan administration. Some of you in this room remember this, and it has never been, there was actually a time when SNAP was almost sufficient for families to make sure that everybody had something looking like a $2,000 calorie meal for adults. So all of this is the bottom line is there's a patchwork of aid that's federal. And then people have, some of these larger organizations like WISCA, they have constituents on the west side who are like really supportive of this and want to support neighbors and have a very broad definition of neighbors. Good. My view, neighbors, big idea. And so they have fundraisers and they actually go out and buy food on the open market. And the guy who's up there right now is a chef by training, actually worked for Share Our Strength, and is developing sort of a purchasing co-op with some of the other larger pantries that raise money so they have their own food. Does that answer your question? And it was also kind of like a quick run through where things come from. Also, companies donate things to Food Bank, which is one of the two biggest distribution channels in the city, and City Harvest is the other. Yes, right here.
My name is Suzanne.
Hello, Suzanne.
I have a community, Greening Full Life, on social media, all the different sites.
Greening Full Life is her thing.
So I, particularly around the concept of urban agriculture, and have been involved with Espinal and the urban ag legislation, 1661. So my question is it on your radar at all?
Yes.
To move into the rooftops or the dead retail space to begin to grow food?
Dead retail space.
Apparently, retail is dying. Allegedly.
Heard that.
Mm-hmm. So is there any opportunity there, or is it anywhere on any radar at all?
Okay, so this is, I'm pretty excited. I'm just going to say this, and I am speaking as from the mayor's office. I'm really excited that people are really pushing this really hard. That anybody who's in this room who's been really excited about, and behind some of this effort to get get the city really to focus on what is your policy on growing food in the city. I thank you, because this really is a cooperative effort. We need that push. I say we, meaning, there's so many things there's so many things happening every day. If you just take the things that are on ABC Eyewitness News at 7 o'clock, and the City Hall going, at all of those things, it's hard to get in there with some of these more like long-term, long horizon issues having to do with planning, having to do with sitting down and really thinking things through. And so I applaud, actually, and support the idea of having this conversation and trying to push this through. So that, I just want to say that I welcome that policy conversation. And the other problem we have, I think, in sort of answering, or as a city talking to all of you about this, is there's a food policy office, but there's not kind of this, from a governance perspective, this is really nerdy, but I want you to understand this as a civics moment for you, which is that, like, who's in charge here, right? Who's in charge of urban ag? How many of you know what we're talking about? How many of you know about the Espinal bill? Yeah, I kind of thought so. I thought there'd be a lot of people here who are on top of this. So thank you for doing that. And I'll probably get in trouble tomorrow morning. No, that's not true. Because I think I'm really saying that, like, we should be having this conversation. And from where I sit on food policy, along with my colleagues at the Parks Department and other, people at NYCHA who, have been part of all that effort. And then there's this whole business of, here's where the rub is for me, I think for some of my colleagues, which is we have a very permissive zoning law right now, and there's been some interest, particularly on the part of commercial farmers, as I have understood this, to say we should have special zoning for urban agriculture, specifically for commercial ag, because we need to tell our investors that we have this special place, right? How many of you here, it's okay, how many of you here are involved in commercial agriculture? Oh, Michael, come on. Just kidding, totally kidding.
I'm involved in commercial.
Yes, I think you are, actually, a little bit. Michael has a lot of interesting things to say about this, and you should talk, if you haven't talked to him about it, or you haven't talked about it, you should at some point. But, I think the question about whether this group of people who are in a private business should get the special privilege of a zoning, basically saying, this land is your land. Not in that broader sense that Woody Guthrie intended, but this sort of piece of the pie really is yours. That's a little bit concerning to all of us. And it's not worked perfectly because we don't have the sovereignty that I know everyone wants, or the sort of the squatters. When I came to New York, it was 1980, it was all about squatting. People don't even remember this now, except those of you who are my age, but like we remember, right? The Lower East Side, it was like people lived in squats. And that was the same era that created kind of the community farming movement on the Lower East Side, and and then beyond. I mean, people in the city have been stewarding these lands, for these pieces of land in their communities, and making their neighborhoods better for a very long time. And I really think that the solution here, the problem is that the community development, this is really a community development project on some level, that's the framework it belongs in. But community development is a very interesting place in a city like New York City that has evolved to a place where we have these mega development deals, right? Again, I don't think I'm going to get in trouble for saying that. I think this is just the environment that we live in. But keep plugging away at this and make us pay attention. I'm hoping very much that the bill comes up for consideration again, and we can have a real conversation about it. Last time we had a conversation about it was a different speaker. So we're now with Cory Johnson, who's, I think, very interested in this. And I don't think Councilmember Espinal is going to stop. And I know that the borough president of Brooklyn is not going to step down on this issue. And we should really wrestle with it. And you should really get us to say who's on first and how are the decisions made.
Because if we're losing the community gardens, can we take it to the roofs?
Because if we're losing, that's right, I'm sorry, you asked me about the sky, didn't you? All right, I'm going to just say something really personal. I mean, comparatively, not really personal, but I'm going to say something about this. So in one of my past lives, I was doing this labor of love in my neighborhood, which was making sure that our local neighborhood YWCA didn't close. And why did I care about that? Is it because I love to swim? No, it is because there are 200 women living there in some of the last SROs, single room occupancy rooms in the city. And I'm happy to say that there are now 300 women living there because that's how we manage the problem. There is no pool, so I also am very popular in my own neighborhood for closing the pool that everybody in Brooklyn learned to swim in, but it was the only way. Financing housing turned out to be the only way to save the housing. So why am I talking about this? Because I know a lot about water and buildings and roofs, and water was the bane of my existence. And when I talk to people who know a lot about this, the issue of water on buildings and the issue of the weight, I think it's a solution that's not for every building, especially buildings that may have been around for a while. You need an engineer to tell you about it. I think the solution, there's a lot of solutions with container gardens for roofs, and there's no reason that there can't be some, in my personal view, this is a personal statement, that there's no reason that people shouldn't be like throwing container gardens up on roofs
everywhere.
One of my favorite places in Brooklyn is actually the pharmacy that was created, pharmacy with an F, that was created by Linda Bryant. Project Eats, thank you. That's on one of the roofs at the East New York Gotham Center, which is a clinic. I mean, there's just so many places to do this stuff, and Grow NYC helps with people. I mean, there's a bunch of people who can help build gardens. You can build a garden. Remember when we used to just go to the store and buy some lumber? I think even if you were to put a plot up there, there's ways that there is a guerrilla, as in Guer, guerrilla history to this. And if you don't know about this, there are people in the room who can tell you all about it. But the same thing we were doing with seed bombs, in the 70s, every roof can have a container garden on it. Mine does. I live in a building and we just put one up there. Citizen action is really important. Yes, ma'am.
Hi,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So my name is Ray. I work at the health department.
I know.
Okay.
This is Ray, everybody. She works at the health department in this really amazing office that she'll tell you like one or two sentences about.
Sure. There's a lot of acronyms. It's the Center for Health Equity. I actually work in the Brooklyn Neighborhood Health Action Center. And part of that is the Center for Health Equity, which is a newish division within the health department started by Mary Bassett, who's awesome.
Who's awesome.
Sad to see her go.
If you haven't read her article about Black Lives Matter in public health, you should read it. Just Google it, find it, read it.
That's Mary Bassett's, not mine. Just to clarify.
I wish we wrote it. Yes. Anyway, what's your question?
So I came to this work working with a food co-op called Central Brooklyn Food Co-op. And we've been organizing for a very long time, and it's really hard, blah, blah, blah. And what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that being in a position of government, there's not a lot of advocacy that you can do, or there's some that you can do.
Definitely
Okay, so
there's
advocacy
some.
is not
You should
the
hold
word.
me accountable at all times.
Radicalism, I guess. So what I've been kind of pushing for, sort of not really in my position in the health department, but my position as a mother in Bed-Stuy who's been organizing with this co-op for a while, is that we need to be more radical in our approach, because we cannot afford the real estate in New York. We cannot afford to actually turn a profit probably in the first 5, maybe 6, 7, 8 years. And so there has to be, I think, an approach that says, hey, we're doing a service that government really needs to do, which is feeding the community.
Yeah.
We should demand the land in order to do that, have the government give us a sweetheart deal that we don't necessarily need to pay back the money. So that's kind of my thinking. And so my question is, that's just an example, but there are a lot of community groups that are doing wonderful work. They're under-resourced and they do the work that they can. If you were to sort of devise like a playbook or like a list of things or a couple of things that community groups can do to really like move the needle in government in terms of, because you have a radical background, yet you're in city government.
What's up with that?
And so what I'm wondering is if you were to advise these community groups on how to push city government and push other city agencies to, give us things that are, the types of services that government should be doing or should be supporting, how would you advise us to go about it? It's a very obvious reason why I'm asking this. So.
Okay, another unofficial comment from your food policy director. Are you willing to get arrested?
Thank you. Listen.
There's radical, there's radical, there's radical, and there's radical, right? Like, again, I kind of invoked the specter of people squatting, And I'm familiar, I don't know if everybody's familiar with Mark Winston Griffith and the effort that you're involved in, but I heard him speak not too long ago at something I was at, and he seemed a little, I know he's been working at this a long time, and it is a very long slog.
He's tired.
He's really tired. I feel like I want to bake him something because he's so brilliant, and he's tried to be. I think this is the point. So people come in, and this is a great example of what I was talking about. We want to do a food co-op. I think we should take over. We should create some kind of buying thing. And 1980, I moved into Park Slope at that time, which was still affordable, and there was a food co-op there, and. I don't know how people do it now, frankly, because I had a very different childhood in New York, young adulthood in New York, but let's go past that. So I think if you're going to come to government, you have to be, you think you know this, but I want to say to everybody, you need to be really clear about what you're asking for, and then you need to also do what one of my mentors, who is David Dinkins, said, which is, he used to always say, I can't understand his problem too well. When he was talking about somebody who was coming in, and he was trying to get something done, and the people in power would say, because he's an elected official who at that time was a borough president, so he'd be talking to Ed Koch and Ed Koch's people, and they would explain to him why he couldn't have something, and he'd say, well, and we would explain why that person was saying that, and he said, I can't really understand his problems too well, meaning. Okay, and this is a good, I think that bill is a good example. It's like you will get all kinds of reasons why we can't. And then you have to find that person who's going to say, and this is how I would do that. And that's part of my role, I think, internally, is to try to navigate that for people outside and inside. So on this food co-op, I think the question is, what do you guys need?
Land.
Yeah, and you need... She's not a plant, by the way. There was this guy at the same thing who was like, oh, well, I did this whole co-op in Maryland. He was from the Salvation Army. He was wearing his major's uniform. This guy was really, right? Jenny Osmond is also here. You all know Jenny? Jenny Osmond runs the Fresh program for the city of New York, which is the supermarket retention program, or attraction program, rather, in New York. We wish it was the retention program. Anyway, so I would say that's the problem, and but this guy had a warehouse. He was able to find a warehouse in near Camden Yards or wherever, right? That still hasn't been gentrified, you can still get it cheap. Or I guess they owned it, right? Like I think the Salvation Army already owned the property. But this is where friends come in handy. I sometimes think that and I don't know what crazy partnerships could come out of this. I don't know who has that building for you. Who would be willing to do it? Like, I think of La Cocina in San Francisco, and it turned out they just had some tech investor who was like, I believe in what you're doing, and I believe in people training, and I believe in incubation. Here's a building for you. And then the only bad side of that is, I think 3 or 4 years later, he was like, oh, I've decided to sell this building. It's a problem. Capitalism is a problem. I'm not saying it's not. And I do sometimes wonder, and I'm not supposed to say this as a city official either, so I'm saying this as Barbara Turk, I sometimes wonder, it's like, I wish we were Detroit in the sense that you can still do this in New York and in Detroit. And then what does that mean for us in New York? What does it mean for people in Seattle or San Francisco or other high, right? Like they're having the same struggles in Seattle. When I talk to my counterpart in Seattle around urban farming and gardening, for example, because the price of real estate is just, and yet, these cities are not 100% wealthy people. We have nearly 44% of New Yorkers are still at or below poverty. I don't have an easy answer for you. Does anybody know anybody who has? Yeah. And and everybody's easy answer now is Oprah. Knowing Oprah has now been superseded by what can we get out of Amazon? That's the dream. Yes.
Hi, well, my name is Alex. I volunteer at Grow to Learn, and
Oh,
they work
yay.
with schools that try to get gardens on school premises that they use for educational and nutrition purposes. And when the schools struggle to get financing, for all the supplies to build the gardens, and so they apply for grants. And part of the grant process is, well, do you have partnerships with other organizations, and do you have people that are actually going to be facilitating the education and the building, the maintenance? If you can organize people who can then maybe partner with the school so you can use their land,
Yes.
that might be a good connection to get access to the land without having to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's some place where we have to be able to be willing to work with people we might not otherwise be working with, particularly when it comes to land, right? And then the schools are also obviously a place, and we're doing a lot now on NYCHA properties. That's not just about middle-class housing, but it's really about the 6 farms that we now run on NYCHA property. I mean, there's opportunity there, but it's tough. And we're trying to do there's a big project to sort of inventory what is there. I think if we all look backwards, but there's no point in it, but if we look backwards in the days when we were giving things, the city should have kept some property, right? Like stuff was being sold for $1 to people, still is in some cases. It's a problem. You need a $1 lot. That's what you need. $1 building. Then you have to have the money to be able to keep it up. Take it from me, I ran a YWCA that was falling apart. Yes?
Hi, my name is Corinna, and I was hoping for you to tell me a little bit about this program called the Good Food Purchasing Program, because I heard about it last year, that it was in the West Coast, and that it was coming to cities, including New York, and as soon as I heard about it, I thought this is the thing, because I work in the food industry, please don't kill me, but I'm a minority. I work in the food industry, and I know with my own eyes how much the food industry has power over shaping what people eat and the food policies in this country. And a program like the Good Food Purchasing Program is really something that would allow us, the city, the government, to take back some of this power that for some reason instead is given to these immense food companies, and not in our benefit but in their own. So I would love for this program to start in New York.
Me too.
Yay, wonderful.
Yeah, we have a contract now with the Center for Good Food Purchasing. All right, what is good food purchasing? Does anybody know? Some people know. Yeah, so the Center for Good Food Purchasing was founded by some folks who actually used to work on food, environment, and water issues for the city government in Los Angeles. So let me back up for just a second. I mentioned, I think, earlier that the city of New York purchases approximately $300 million worth of food every year. George knows this well. And although I don't know the gap, people continue to say that New York City is the second largest institutional purchaser of food after the United States military. Now, what I don't know, what I've never checked down, we should do this, is the gap then, is the gap like $6 zillion in the military versus our $300 million? I'm not really sure, but we are the second largest producer, so we're very powerful in that way. And the idea is that cities can actually be kind of a consumer monopoly, if I was going to talk about it in economic terms, of saying, we're a big enough customer that we really want you, and I'm going to simplify this, we're going to start our next contracts that we bid out. There's going to be a bid specification in there that we will no longer purchase, well, it just says we only want antibiotic-free chicken. And by the way, the schools are purchasing antibiotic-free chicken in New York City. But this doesn't happen overnight, right? This is not like I decide to go vegetarian and the next morning I just stop buying meat. So if the city decides to stop buying meat, for example, it's going to take a while for that to play out. We have long contracts. We have 4 or 5 year contracts in some cases. Anyway, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. So this is not a slam dunk overnight thing, but it's a process. So as I mentioned earlier, for a long time now in New York City, we have been essentially training or working with suppliers to try to get more nutritious products, whole grains, or half whole, whole wheat. We have a set of specifications for the food. And all that predates me. But what the Center for Good Food Purchasing said is, there's a lot of different values that we could advance having to do with food. And one is, gee, wouldn't it be great if a certain percentage of our food a bigger percentage of our food was purchased from local vendors and benefited the local economy? Wouldn't it be good if we purchased food that is sustainably sourced, grown within a certain radius of the city or grown locally? For us, that often means, particularly on the school food side, from New York State. It might be a different definition in California, but that's probably the one we will use, or something close to it. And then, wouldn't it be great if more of our seafood and poultry and meat was sourced from growers who are kind to animals? And wouldn't it be great if we purchased more of our food from companies that are good to their workers, that have good safety records and pay well? Now, for those of you who know the food industry, these are not easy things to find in all cases, right? But the idea is to create essentially, I'll call this, lots of things get called movements right now. I'm always surprised by that sometimes because I'm like, is that really a movement? But there is an effort, I would say, on the part of, so they did this, they set up this sort of, in Los Angeles, they set up these value categories, and they set up a set of benchmarks based on a lot of research and a lot of consultation with various certifications and so forth, and created kind of a lead certification program, I guess would be the way I describe it, which is, you get points, the better, and you want to try to get stars and points. It's all very, very cool. But they start with a baseline. So what they've started to do is they've started to basically market this consultation. And we've now had this consultation with two of our agencies. One is the Department of Education and the School Food Group, which is about 72% of our spend is school food. That's not atypical. And then they also did this baseline study with our Health and Hospitals Corporation. The City of New York has 11 public hospitals, you probably know this, and several clinics, but our inpatient meals are all sourced from a company called Sodexo, you may have heard of. And we were very curious to do this with Sodexo for reasons that will become apparent. So we gave the center and their analysts all the information we possibly could about what we buy. And the short version of this story is that our main takeaway, and this was not surprising to anybody, is that we don't have a lot of transparency into what we buy. We don't get a lot of information about it. So this is like job one, right? It's like we really actually want to know about where our food is coming from, don't we? And can't we get more companies and the distributors and the brokers, can we peel away all those layers and get a better view of all that? And one of the things we actually have the power to do as consumers, and you're seeing this actually happen just generally without a lot of organization, right? Is more of us are asking about our food and where it comes from. So why wouldn't the city want to know that for some of the city's most, nutritionally challenged, people who really struggle and really depend on our meals. And so that's what we're up to. So we've done these baselines. I'm not going to review the results with you here because it's a whole process, but the bottom line is we know that we have to start asking more questions. We got labor reports on all the different companies for the last 5 years. All this stuff is pretty public, actually. And, it was kind of great because even without any prompting, a lot of some of the people we were working with just started calling these companies and said, wait a minute, I didn't know you'd had this workplace. You've been called out 19 times on this issue. People are like, what is this? We don't want to be part of this. So I think what will happen now is we will start to develop game plans to get better in each of those categories. And this is going to call to, I'm excited about this I should have said this first. I'm excited about this because I'm often asked about like specific issues. So like, what are you guys doing about meat? Very common question, an important question is, what are we doing about our impact on the climate, and what can the city do as a city to reduce the agricultural impact on climate change? And as consumers, what can we do about that? Or, you know, what are we going to do to make school food better and more, you know, more flexible, more diverse, more palatable, more, you know, more anything that is your concern about school food. And there's a whole host of these issues. So this gives us an actual tool and an actual process that we can work on. This is not something that's going to happen. This is now going to be a process. And every year we're going to have game plans for every agency. Every agency is going to go through this baseline. We would be the only city to do that, to do it for our whole food spend so far. So that's a little bit about good food purchasing. I'm happy to, I could talk about this for hours, so I should stop doing that. But yeah, hi.
Hi. My name is Gabby, and thank you. My name is Gabby, and I am at EDC, and I do government and community relations there.
Do you know each other?
Yes. And I am generally interested in food, cooking, food policy, and CSAs. And my question is, why do you think historically the city has put so few resources into food and food policy, especially compared to other municipalities in the country? And what do you think we can do about that to change it? I know that's like a huge existential question.
No,
but
it's not.
No, it's actually, do you have any ideas about that? And I'm not being cute. Like, I think this actually is, this is maybe an insider's question that she just asked me, but her question is, you know, so much of what we are working on, including my office, you know, is just under, like, our office is 3 people. You're looking at 2 of them. Molly Hartman was the 3rd. Some of you remember Molly Hartman. We still have the line. But we have to find the next Molly Hartman, so that's a project that we're working on. I think that, you know, we worked hard to get from 1 person to 2 persons to 3 persons. I mean, I argued for a 3rd line. She's sitting right here, but more to the point, like if you look at what's happening in the health department, and I think a lot of people in the health department would say, gosh, how come all of our food people are on these, you know, these foundation lines? Why aren't they city-funded people? And why? And why is, you know, EDC is a little bit of a different financing scheme because they earn their money, like, because they have leases. You guys have leases, you're functioning, you're actually a nonprofit associated with the city, but they're not city employees. And a lot of what you do increasingly, and this comes from, I think what I really want to say about this is, first of all, it's super exciting for me to meet so many people, because I have a big arc of history on this. To you know, wherever I go in New York City government, there's always somebody. They could be working at Department of Aging, they could be working at Economic Development, they could be working in DCAS, which is the purchasing agency, whatever it is, and everybody wants to come up to me and talk to me about how much they care about food and they want to figure out how to work on that issue. And so my view of the world, from where I sit, is we're kind of like the hub, and I feel like even though there's 3 of us in our office, we're kind of coordinating. It's like that Verizon commercial, whatever, where the guy comes to your house to fix your phone, but there's like a lot of people standing behind him, figuratively. That's kind of how I feel about this role. So in some ways, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and then for me, I mean, I come out of both nonprofit and government in the Dinkins years when we had no money. Like, the city was bleeding money at that point. And you just make do with what you have. So I get that we can't just go in and ask for $100 million from OMB, but I'm also not sure that that's the solution to our problem either, right? Like, if we need to disrupt systems, I mean, I'm curious about what new needs you may have for the budget process, so we can talk later, but I think you're right. But I also think that I feel like we have hidden allies and not so hidden allies throughout city government at this point, and I don't think that was the case 10 years ago. Even in the short time I've been here, there's so many people, and you're 2 of them, you know? Yes? glass is half full. I have to just come to work every morning feeling that way.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I currently work as a service designer for a nonprofit that partners with government agencies to help figure out where there are leverage points in government services. So like I'm working with Department of Education right now, Department of Social Services. And I want to go back to something.
A process consultant of some kind.
Essentially, so when a program isn't working well and the team doesn't have
We have something like, you're like a SWAT team for that?
Yep, you're called a service designer, but I'm pretty sure
See me later.
it's a fancy word for things people have been doing for a long time for free. I mean communities. And so something you had mentioned before was like, why wouldn't the city want to know about their transparency around purchasing? Could you answer that question? Like, why wouldn't a city agency want to know about something like that? Like, what's either barrier, be it financial, mental, organizational, that would prevent someone from like poking at those questions?
Well, I have to tell you, I don't think, that was kind of a rhetorical question. Like, the response to this program has been so positive. So when I get everybody in a room, there's like usually about 25 to 30 people in a room who are doing some activity around purchasing food in all these agencies. Like, we're very psyched about this. So I think it just was never, something happens when the mayor's office and the person of the food policy office comes in and says, no, we really want you to know these questions. And so there's a power in that. And I think so I'm optimistic that like I've known from the beginning of taking this job just with the food policy, the food procurement groups that are just working, agencies that are just working on nutrition, they're like, what else can we do? Because they really believe in feeding people well. Actually, people are surprised to hear that. People are very committed to that, yes.
Will they pay more for?
Will who pay more?
Will the city pay more for
there's
better food? Are there like low bidding rules or anything that you're up against, or do you have some leeway there?
We have. It's like working in a 4x4 box with barbed wire inside. So there is gonna be the law department's part of. I mean, I have everybody and their grandmothers in this room to help us navigate the contract issues and the legal issues. So I'm not saying any of this is, oh gee, if we had just written that everything should have a safe marine certification, our problems would be solved. I mean, it's not that simple. We have to we're actually prohibited by the state constitution to do anything that sort of relates to social engineering or social value related to our procurement. We're really supposed to take your tax dollars and use them incredibly wisely, and the definition of wisely is get the cheapest thing, if I was to simplify this. So so I'm gonna hold up an example of how this can happen, and I'm not saying this is exactly how we'll do it, but you may have heard of Lynn Laughlin, who's one of my current other heroes. And Lynn Laughlin has been creating meals at Lenox Hill Neighborhood House now for a while and has learned a lot about how to, with her parsimonious city dollars for senior services and children's services, to put foods on, she's just done this incrementally in partnership with Grow NYC, which the city could never do anything disruptive without. They're a big part of that. She's figured out how, okay, instead of buying chicken breasts, I can buy a cheaper cut of meat and maybe a little less, and I can save a little bit of money, so I can buy more whole grains from Grow NYC, and I can use, I can put more broccoli if I use frozen broccoli, and it's as nutritious, but maybe not so hard to prepare. And then, she's just doing this one ingredient at a time. She gets a little, and there's no such thing as meatless Mondays, there's just lasagna Mondays, but there's no meat in it, right? Like, and anybody who's in this field, who's in the cook side of these things, and we pay our cooks like ridiculously. Like for people who are still scratch cooking in some of these agencies, which is a whole other discussion, scratch cooking versus one of the ways we saved money after the fiscal crisis was closing a lot of kitchens. So, I think all these things are, sort of rebuilding and retooling and recognizing these jobs which are terribly underpaid and mostly, occupied by women and women of color. Let's just be clear about that. So we have a lot of, I think what this is going to do for us is it's a way to open up some of those, I have a very large ambition around this to open up some of those conversations as well. And I think the Department for the Aging has put in a big request to increase their food budget. I think it's inevitable.
Robert, can I say something about Lynn?
Look at all the hands that are happening now.
Say something about Lynn.
I want to add real
She's
quickly.
a hero.
We talked about intentionality, right? And that you have to be intentional about how we're looking at what we're doing, and that's what Lynn did. And so what she was able to find is that she could purchase local grains and local dried beans, and because they had higher nutritional values to Uncle Ben's rice, which is what they were otherwise buying, and I can't remember the bean equivalent, she could spend less money buying local organic grains and beans and serve that to seniors who are dependent upon her for feeding them, and actually save money. And so she was able to switch from 90% frozen to 90% fresh.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And significantly local. So it's the intentionality of wanting to choose to look at it and then incorporating the changes that need to be made. And then having the distributor available to make those products available.
It's a great partnership. Anna Bessendorf, do you have a question?
Can you speak to how the office has created access to food for people in underserved communities?
Can you speak about how the office has created access to food for people in underserved communities?
Oh, God. Did you have something in particular in mind, a particular program? Yeah, okay, yeah.
So thank you for that question. The question is, what are we doing on access? So access, as you probably know, has a lot of different components. There's a lot of barriers to access. We are focused a lot on this question of, do people, food is expensive, what can we do to put more money in people's pockets? And so overall in the administration, issues and working, believe it or not, with the state, we've raised the minimum wage, and we have done everything we possibly can just to put, there's a whole list of things that we've tried to do around housing and housing benefits for seniors, and I don't know that we're actually keeping up with housing prices. In fact, I'm pretty sure we're not, but household budgets is a big focus of the administration, and what can we do on that? The office itself is kind of, we are in this paradigm that we were talking about earlier, you've all been talking about earlier, which is we've kind of had a food pantry paradigm around access for the poorest New Yorkers for a very long time. It was never meant to be permanent. I don't know if you know this, but this was sort of like 1,000 points of light. Bush years, right? Like the 1,000 points, he just died and he's been canonized. I don't know. I'm very puzzled by that, I guess. But anyway, not to get too off topic. But it was all about like, okay, so volunteers will come forward, we're cutting SNAP, but volunteers will come forward and people will get fed and churches will feed people and it's all gonna be good. And not really addressing any of the underlying structural problems around wages and jobs and so forth. And we have an even worse situation now. We have wages, as you know, have stagnated for multiple years for people at lower incomes, and then of course skyrocketed for people at the other end of the spectrum. It's pretty lousy. So anyway, all this was supposed to be temporary. And when I first took this job, there was interest on the part of one of the city's largest foundations, which is, it's Leona and Harry Helmsley's money. Again, I'm playing to maybe an older audience here, but I heard that, but I'm gonna stand over by you guys. No, but so these guys, Harry Helmsley was another big builder in New York City at the same time as Fred Trump, and built a lot of buildings and made a lot of money, and he had a wife named Leona who was kind of their hotelier business runner, and she had kind of a big reputation as being, kind of Cruella de Vil of the real estate scene here in New York. And then she died and left all of her money to her dog. Like, this is actually all true, I'm not making this up. Like, there was a whole will, in her will, the dog was taken care of, right? So when they first came to me, the running joke was, I didn't know that Helmsley was funding in New York City. I thought they had some family projects, but that they weren't funding in New York City. And I couldn't help but ask, like Kathy Goldman, who some of you know, I was like, did the dog die? Like, where did this money come from? So anyway, how am I doing on time? I must be like completely...
You keep going.
I'm sorry, I've been watching Mrs. Maisel. I think I should stop watching Mrs. So anyway, let me just say one more thing about this. So this was never supposed to be permanent, right? And now here we are. So one of the things we've done is, we did do this whole project because the whole pantry world, for those of you who are doing pantry world things, is it's all volunteer. It's all, kind of ground up, and it is, there's various qualities. There's 1,000 pantries in New York City. There's a handful of them that are super pantries. I think of Wisca as a super pantry. But, the distribution of the food follows where there are people who've opened pantries. It doesn't necessarily follow where the need is. So this group of people, Food Bank, City Harvest, and United Way, and our own EFAP program got together, figured out what a common metric of food gap would be, which was the difference between need and supply in different neighborhoods, and have actually put another, the capacity. It's not just, food doesn't serve, this is hard to understand, but it's like food, emergency food doesn't solve the problem of hunger, right? So, and it's only supposed to be emergency, but now it's really just, it's a supplemental dependent entity. Karen's exactly right about that. And I have mixed feelings about having done what we did, but we actually have created more pantries in places where people need them, and not just in churches, but in places like Make the Road have opened a giant pantry, and there's a place out in Flushing that is a South Asian food pantry, which is the most cool place ever. And people who come in there need, get other things from going to pantries. I think that's the most important thing to understand here is they get a lot of navigation, a lot of new immigrants come through them. But now what I'm interested in doing is I'm interested in sort of going a little bit further up on what I think of as the human rights ladder, and I think we really need to trust people and give them money so they can go to the supermarket and buy food. So I'm just going to bring you with me.
I was just talking about that.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk to you later about what we're working on. So we are working on this project. We have a little pilot going on where we're actually giving people money. And I'm trying, what I really want is City Snap, but I'm not going to get that. But if you could sort of attach it to, well, you can spend this on, I'm sorry, Karen, but fruits and vegetables and get some benefits for lean meats and pasta and things like that. So we're working on something that works like that, and more on that later. And then there's supermarkets. We don't have enough supermarkets. Anybody want to run a supermarket? Okay. Somebody, do you want to run a supermarket? See this woman right here afterwards.
I know nothing about it.
That's why you want to start one. All right. I can't see who you're pointing to, but there you are. Thank you.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Juliana. I work with farmers markets, primarily in low-income communities. So
with Grow NYC or with another farmers market?
I work with Harvest Home Farmers Market.
Oh, fantastic. Nice to see you.
You too. So you made a really interesting comment earlier about, being a part of the government, taxpayer money. This, I think you used the phrase social engineering, or is that what you said?
I might have used that in a context, yes.
Right. So I guess what you were saying is that as, a government official working with public money, essentially what you can't be doing is I guess, imposing what you think is how people should act, is what I kind of pulled from that. But what to buy, right, exactly.
What to buy.
What to buy, right, what to buy, how to think, how to feel, all of that. But I feel, as a policymaker, essentially what you are doing is trying to shape people's behaviors in a way that is conducive for, the well-being of, I guess the city as a whole, right? So I kind of wanted to ask you about being in food policy and having food access be a social determinant of health, among education and employment and housing and that kind of stuff. How are you sort of working with other policymakers who are, individually addressing those other social determinants of health to kind of have this collective impact? And kind of what are the moral implications that you yourself experience being in such a position of influence?
Can I start with the last part? Like that was such a multi-faceted.
Sorry, I had a lot of
stuff. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm going to just try to figure out if I'm. So I'm not sure that I completely agree with. I don't feel like I'm telling people what to eat.
Not like that, but you, in terms of.
And maybe that's what
with the schools and everything, right? Ultimately, someone has to make those decisions.
I think we're trying to I think we're trying to create the power. From government, which can be powerful because we have money to spend in the marketplace for food. We're trying to force the question about what people formulate and sell us. So that's what we're trying to do. But I think there is a big issue here because there has been an experience of, you know, you should not drink soda, you should do this, you should do that. And I think there was some missing pieces of that policy. And so, you know, there's an allergy, well, so that's not, I mean, I'm not the person who comes around and takes sodas out of people's hands. I might take your cigarette away because I used to smoke and my father died of cancer. But I think so that's fine. There are always moral implications to taking a position, right? I actually have no qualms about being part of government. I've been very fortunate because I've gotten to work for 3 citywide elected officials now, and it just so happened that I ran into the ones who I thought the most of, right? So I got to work for Carol Bellamy, who many of you probably don't even remember. But you know, she's had all the Mother Teresa jobs. Somebody back there remembers her. She had all the Mother Teresa jobs since she was the city council president. She was the city's ombudsman. She had the position that sort of Tish James has now. And then she went to work for UNICEF. She was the head of UNICEF, and she was also the head of the Peace Corps. You know, like she was the real deal. She was a true public servant. And the same with David Dinkins. And I know people have different opinions about Bill de Blasio, but I think his heart's in the right place, right? I mean, you know, he wants people to get, he announced another labor settlement today. He wants people to get paid well. He doesn't want city workers to be on food stamps. So I've had an opportunity to be part of administrations that were aligned with my values.
Just to clarify, I wasn't sort of coming from the place
No, I'm worried that you feel attacked.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, I definitely have a lot of respect for what you do. I just wonder, you know, being in the position, right? You're working with the mayor's office, food policy. Policy, I guess, at its essence is the structure of the day-to-day. It's the structure of how people live, how they, you know, get to work, how they, you know, buy their food. So I more wanted to hear about your I guess personal experience with being able to shape that for New Yorkers.
Personal experience with, like, I don't even think about, I mean, I don't know, that's such a big, I mean, I come to work every morning, I'm a public